Hello everybody, welcome to my basement. My name is Lynette Kay and I am the 4-H educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Oneida County. One of my favorite parts of my job is when I get to share things that I love with you. And I'm so excited that your teacher invited me to join you today because I get to share something that I absolutely love. And I bet you can tell what that is by what's happening behind me. I love plants. I love to grow them, plant them, eat them. I love the smell of them, but I don't like when they grow in my garden and I have to weed them. Plants are very important. You might not realize it, but we use them every day. We eat them, we build our houses from the wood that comes from them. That's why it's so important that we learn about them. We need to learn about their parts. We need to learn how to grow and care for them. We need to know how to make more of them. That way we can harvest them to use them. Today's video was inspired by what greeted me this morning outside my front door. Snow covering my daffodils. It's May 8th, 2020, and there is snow on my daffodils. If you watch my pollination video or my dissecting daffodil video, you will remember that the whole reason that a plant produces beautiful petals or a nice fragrance is to attract pollinators such as bees and butterflies. The insects visit the flowers in search of nectar and in turn transfer pollen from the male part of the plant to the female, resulting in fertilization and seed development. Since I never see bees, butterflies, or hummingbirds flying around in a snowstorm, this leads to the question, are seeds the only way that plants can reproduce? Today we're going to learn about the different ways that plants can be propagated. Remember that every species needs to be able to reproduce and create the next generation of offspring. If they don't, then that species will end up going extinct. Therefore, we're going to talk about ways that plants reproduce as well as ways that we propagate or reproduce plants. We're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of seeds. We're going to look at a thing called cutting. We're going to look at plant adaptations. What are some ways that plants are able to reproduce themselves? We're going to look at division and layering. We're going to discuss when is the correct time to use a specific method based on what their outcome is supposed to be. And finally, why is it so important that we know about this? Propagation simply means making more. When we're talking plant propagation, we simply mean we're going to make more plants. Let's start with the seed. In our pollination video, we learned that plants can be pollinated by birds, bees, wind, and even us. Any plant that produces seed has a flower. As the butterfly visits a flower in search of sweet nectar, a valuable food source, pollen attaches to the body of the insect. When the insect rubs against the pistil of the flower, some of that pollen may stick to the stigma. That is called pollination. If it is the right type of pollen, meaning apple on apple or banana on banana, then fertilization will take place, and the result of fertilization is seed development. If a plant produces brightly colored petals to attract pollinators, it only stands to reason that it would bloom when pollinators are active. When are insects most active? When the weather is warm. Then why, knowing how important it is that pollination and seed development happen, would daffodils bloom at a time when pollinators might not be around? Daffodils are one of the first flowers that bloom in the spring, and this strategy aids them greatly in pollination. As the insects emerge from their long winter sleep, they're looking for a food source, and if daffodils are blooming, that's where they're going to go. However, that can also be a deterrent. We're expecting snow this weekend. How many insects do you see that fly around when the snow is flying? So therefore, daffodils can also be in jeopardy of not being pollinated because of the weather. Let's dig up some daffodils and see some different ways that some plants have evolved to reproduce other than by pollination. We're now going to dig up some daffodils. Spring is not the best time to do this. Typically you want to wait until the fall when the leaves are dormant. The plant has totally died back to the ground. That's because photosynthesis needs to take place in the leaves for food development, and that food development is going to be stored underground. So let's look at underground. Daffodils actually develop from bulbs. 5 years ago I planted one bulb, and over the years the bulbs have multiplied. They've created little bulblets. These bulbs are another means of plant reproduction. This is asexual reproduction. That means not from pollination. Pollination is a sexual reproduction. The bulbs will be identical to the parent plant. So you can see each of these bulbs has a blossom on it. It's just like the parent. If we were growing daffodils from seed, there may be some variation in what the seed develops into, depending on what the parents were. So another means that some plants have used to reproduce is to create bulbs. As I go around in my garden right now, I can plant each one of these in a separate hole, and over time they're going to multiply and create more and more plants, and I'll have more and more of this same type of daffodil. Remember, seeds and bulbs are different. Bulbs will look like their parents. That's because they are the result of asexual reproduction. So if I want daffodils that look the same, I know I can divide the plant and replant the bulbs. If we want to create different types of daffodils, we need pollination. Seeds carry the characteristics of both the parents. They are hybrids, which simply means that they aren't exactly like the parent, and they are the result of sexual reproduction. Because we know we can transfer genetic information through pollination, we have been able to selectively breed the bigger, tastier, and healthier fruits and vegetables that we enjoy today. When starting seeds, you don't need a lot of expensive equipment. I got this out of my trash. I have a rotisserie chicken container. I have an applesauce container that I've put a hole in the bottom for drainage. I have a small container with some soil in it. If you're going to spend money on some good soil. Don't use the soil from your garden. This is sterile. It doesn't have any bacteria or anything that's going to harm your seeds. Also, get some good quality seeds. We're going to be growing sunflower seeds today. I have a marker so I can put a label into my plants. It says sunflower and today's date, the 19th of May. You also need some scissors if you're going to cut your labels or anything like that. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is put some soil in this cup. Scoop it up here. Now the soil should be moist. You don't want to put dry soil in here because once the soil dries out, it's very hard for it to get wet again. So it's easier to start with some moist soil. So you have it in there. Don't fill it all the way to the top. You want a little bit of a rim. Then you're just going to gently poke a little bit of hole in there, and that's where your seeds are going to go, right in the center of the cup. Then I'm going to put 2 seeds in here, and it's going to be hard to see because the seeds are black and my soil is black. But I put the 2 little seeds right in the center, and then I'm going to put a little bit of soil on top. Now it is possible to put too much soil on top of your seeds. You normally don't want to bury them any deeper than the width of the seed. Gently pat that down so the soil makes some contact with the seed. I'm going to stick our label in there so we know what it is and we know today's date. And then we're going to stick it inside of our container. Put the lid on, and then I'm going to take it down into my basement and put it onto a light, and I'll show you that a little later. Cuttings are another simple way to propagate plants. I'm going to take a cutting of this Propagation right here, and you can see I've left a leaf node. That's where roots are going to form. So we're going to be sticking this in the soil in just a little bit. We're also going to take a cutting of some Coleus. So come on with me while we cut some Coleus. Coleus is one of the simplest plants to propagate. We're going to do it by cuttings. I'm going to come in here and just cut off a piece of my Coleus. I'm going to strip these leaves off the bottom. I think I'll take these off as well. And we're going to take this into the garage and I'll show you how to propagate Coleus. I'm going to show you 2 simple ways to do cuttings. First, we're going to do the Propagation. I have some moistened soil in a container. I'm going to poke a hole down through the center of it. You want it pretty deep because our cutting is really long. Where the leaves were on the original plant, I've removed them. I cut them off like this. I've also reduced the size of the leaves. You want to do that because there's no roots to bring the water up and support the leaves. So you want to reduce the surface area on the leaves. But where the roots or where the leaves were is where the roots are going to form. So we've got our cutting ready. We're just going to stick it down in there and then firm it in so we know that it's made some contact with the soil. Now make sure your soil is wet. Mine's a little bit too wet here, but that's what you want. You're going to stick that right there. The next thing we're going to do is Coleus, and this is Coleus, where again, where there were leaves is where the roots are going to form. We've removed the leaves. We're going to take a glass, fill it with some water, just like that. Take your Coleus, stick it in a glass. That's all there is to it. Anybody can root Coleus. In a couple weeks, you're going to be able to look here and see little roots forming. Once those roots are 2 or 3 inches long, you'll be able to take it out, pot it up in some potting soil, or move it right into your flower garden, or into a hanging basket, or anything like that. But this is 2 ways that you can do cuttings. Now remember, cuttings are asexual reproduction. The plants you take are going to be identical genetically to the parent plant. Seeds, on the other hand, are sexual reproduction. So the result of the seed is going to depend on what the 2 parent plants were like. You want to provide your seedlings a fair amount of light. In the past, I've tried growing under an LED and I did not like the results. I have used fluorescent in the past and been pleased. As soon as your seedlings emerge, crack the lid on the rotisserie container to allow the seedlings to adjust to a more normal humidity. If you notice any form of mold develop, that is an indication of excessive moisture. Open the lid and allow air circulation. If all goes well, your seedlings should sprout within a week or so, and your cuttings should have a healthy root system in about a month. The Coleus doesn't need to be placed under a light. A windowsill will do just fine. Another way plants have modified themselves to reproduce other than by seed is through rhizomes. Rhizomes are actually modified stems that creep underneath the ground. This is a Solomon seal. We're going to dig this up to take a look at some rhizomes. A few years ago, a friend gave me a piece of Solomon seal. You can see how nicely it has spread out now. We're going to dig some up and take a look at the rhizomes. Now, rhizomes are actually modified stems that grow underneath the ground. See, it's better to see underneath here. See if we can break some off. Oh, there's one. Okay, so this is actually a modified stem, and they have nodes, and from the nodes the new shoots will appear and roots will come out. So I can go through and break all of these off and create brand new plants. Break that part. I can break that off. Keep that. So there you can see I've created several plants from just one. I can go and plant these now, and they in turn will spread. This is another means of asexual reproduction. This plant will be identical to the parent. Remember, it's not through pollination, it's through asexual reproduction. And this is a great way to get the genetics that are identical to the parent plant. Not all rhizomes are long and skinny like the ones on the Solomon seal. Let's look at daylilies rhizomes. You can see here, there's no long runners or not runners, don't call them runners, like on the Solomon seal. These are all really close together. But sometimes you can just break the plant off like this. And there I have a daylily plant that's identical to the parent plant. Again, asexual reproduction. So daylilies are rhizomes. You can divide them to create more plants. Sometimes the branch or the bunch is really thick and you can't break it apart like that, in which case you use a machete. Let's take a look at that and see. Grab your machete, keep your fingers out of the way, and give it a good hack. And you can break it apart. And there I've got some more plants. But again, these are rhizomes. They don't look the same as the Solomon seal, but rhizomes are modified stems that grow underneath the ground. Asexual reproduction creates a plant identical to the parent plant. So again, if I want this same plant, then I'm going to want to reproduce it by division. Evolution has enabled some stems the ability to root above ground. Stolons are a creeping horizontal plant stem or runner that roots at points along its length to form new plants. The next time you go out picking strawberries, see if you can identify the stolons. Strawberry plants will send out a long runner. Every few inches along that runner, you will see a small cluster of leaves. If that cluster of leaves comes into contact with the soil, roots will form and a new plant will start to establish itself. This is another example of how plants can reproduce quickly without relying on pollination. This is a Bloomerang Lilac. It's a very expensive plant, and what's really unique about it is it blooms in the spring and then later in the fall. This spring, as I was crawling around doing some weeding, I noticed that something unique had happened, and it's called layering. Some of the branches had touched the ground, and where they touched the ground, they actually rooted. I was able to go in, separate them from the parent plant, and pot them up, and I now have additional Bloomerang Lilacs from my original plant. I thought I would try an experiment with my Weigelia plants. I'm going to see if I can get them to layer. Sit. Stay right there. So I have my Weigelia branch. I'm going to dig a little bit of soil away. I'm going to push my branch down so that it makes contact with the soil. I'm going to cover it back up, and then I'm going to place a brick over it to make sure that that branch stays in contact with the soil. Hopefully, probably by the fall, I can remove the brick and I'll see if there are any roots that have formed. Then I'll be able to sever it from the parent plant, just like I did with the lilacs, and I'll have a whole nother Weigelia, genetically the same as this. This is one of the ways that plants are propagated en masse. If you find a plant that you really like, then by layering or by cuttings or root division, that's the best way to get an identical parent plant. Spring is one of the best times to pot up some of your divisions. I'm going to show you how I'm going to pot up this hardy geranium. I've dug it up from the garden. Now I'm going to break it up. Geraniums are pretty easy to split. I can do it with my hands just by breaking it apart like that. I'm going to take this section, I'm going to put it in the pot like this, and then fill some soil around it. Kind of firm it down into place. And that's really all you need to do. I'm going to water it after this. Now, it's important to understand that when you're planting them up, you don't want to bury them any deeper than the normal soil level. So all of this is going to go down underground, but you're going to keep the soil level right about here. So for this one, I'm going to have to make it a little deeper so I can tuck those roots down in there. And then I'm going to fill the soil around, maintaining that soil level. Pat it down, make sure those roots make some good contact. I'm going to water it in, and that's all there is to it. And as you can see, I've been busy potting up some of the plants from my garden. Let's go back where we started with seeds. In order for any species to survive, it must be able to reproduce a new generation that carries its genetic information forward. Failure to do that will result in extinction. You might think that starting plants from seed is pretty straightforward. Seed is covered by soil, water softens the seed coat, and temperature and sunlight trigger growth. When it matures, it will bloom and hopefully be pollinated, starting the whole cycle all over again. Unfortunately, growing from seed is not always the quickest means of propagation. Some plants, like many of our vegetables and some of our fruits, reach maturity quickly, 60, 90, 120 days. These are typically annuals. These are plants that live their entire life cycle within 1 year. This is an acorn. It's the seed of the oak tree. The oak tree produces hundreds and thousands of acorns. If conditions are right, the seeds will start to germinate, starting the next generation of oak trees. However, the problem with oak trees and many other plants is that they take a long time to mature, and a plant must be a certain age in order to reproduce. In the case of the oak tree, it can take 20 or 30 years. Thank goodness we don't rely on acorns for food. Can you imagine what would happen if we had to wait 20 years to harvest a food crop? We'd all starve. Believe it or not, the oak tree produces some of the most expensive wood available. The slow growth produces a very strong and dense wood that is highly prized for furniture and flooring. So sometimes it's worth waiting 20, 30, or even 100 years to harvest a plant. Now let's review what we have discussed using daffodils as our example. To create a new type of daffodil, I will need to pollinate it. Because the seeds will carry the genetic information from both its parents, I won't know what the flowers will look like till the plant actually matures, and that could take a couple of years. If after a few years my pollination experiment yields a plant that I like, I won't be able to create new identical plants by pollination. Instead, I will need to let the plants asexually reproduce and create bulbs. Then after several years, I can dig up the bulbs and plant them. Let's review why it's so important that we know all of this. The moral of the story is that if you want to create plants that have bigger flowers, smell better, taste better, mature faster, then we need pollination. If we then want to propagate that plant because we like it and we want to maintain its genetic characteristics, then we need to use asexual means of propagation. Division, layering, cuttings. Pause this video to see if you can answer or describe the reasons plants have developed different propagation methods, as well as how we can use those methods to our advantage. I wanted to show you the results of our seed planting and our cutting experiment. Let's start with the seeds first. You can see that only one seed germinated in our experiment here. We put 2 seeds in this cup and we only got 1 to germinate. Now, I did originally put this under the lights and it germinated just fine, but after it came up from under the lights, I moved it to the windowsill because I wanted to show everybody a very common problem that happens when you try to grow seedlings in a windowsill. They tend to get really long and leggy like this, and that's because they're reaching for the light. You don't have enough light typically in a windowsill to germinate seeds. If you do try to do it, you often have to rotate the seeds around so that the seedlings will grow straight, because they're going to try and reach for as much light as they can. When you do grow under a light in your basement, like a shop light or something like that, you want to try and keep the light really low as you can, so that those seedlings don't have to reach really high and far to grow up. Now, our seeds were planted on 5/19. Today is 6/12, so we're just about 3 weeks in, and I want to show you some other things that we did, particularly the cuttings. So let's move that out of the way, and let's move this cutting in. And you can see our coleus here. Remember, all we did was take the cutting of coleus and stick it in a glass of water. So let's remove it from the glass of water. And I hope you can see here that we've got some really great roots going. And down here at the bottom, where we took off the leaves at first, I said that the leaves or the roots were going to start to come where the leaves were, and you can see there's a whole bunch of roots starting right there. And again, there were some leaves here, and there's roots starting there. So this is ready to be potted up. After 3 weeks, we've got enough roots here that I can pot this and put it out into my garden or into a pot on my back porch. And finally, let's look at this Tradescantia. We're going to pop it open and see exactly what we've got. Let's see if we've got any roots in this. Let's pop it this way. Oh, flip it around. I don't see any roots there. Not seeing anything yet. No, I can feel... Yeah, see, there's one good long root starting right there. Oh, a couple good roots. So we do have roots on this plant as well. That's doing just fine. So again, I'm going to put this out in my garden, probably plant it in the same pot as the coleus, and I'll get some new plants going. Thank you for letting me come into your homes and share my love of plants with you today. I hope today's video has inspired you to try your hand at cutting, starting seeds, or even layering. I'd love to hear comments from you. You can reach me at the contact information enclosed on this slide. Thanks a lot and have a great day.